I'm going to be making this beautiful apple pie today. It's so yummy and it is unbelievably easy to make. Yes, it does look difficult, but that's the beauty of this recipe. I show you step by step exactly what to do, and it is foolproof basically if you follow everything I say. In a bowl, I sieved 250 grams of plain flour, not self-raising flour, plain flour. And I heard from somebody that the secret to a perfect and delicious pastry or pie pastry is to sieve the flour first. And yes, I can confirm that that is indeed true. When I think about it, I feel that the reason behind this is that by sieving the flour, you're getting air into the flour and then you are able to get a lighter pastry, which makes sense to me. To the flour, I added just a pinch of salt and also 3 tablespoons of sugar. And this amount of sugar was perfect for this pastry. It wasn't too sweet and it was just sweet enough. I then went ahead and mixed all the dried ingredients together with a fork. I have 350 grams of cold butter there. So I did use stork, which is really good for pastries, and it is important that your butter is cold. And I just cut them into smaller pieces and added them into the flour mixture. And I went ahead and mixed it with a fork. You can use a pastry cutter, I think they're called, but I don't have one. So I used a fork, which worked just fine. The reason I'm not using my hands is because I want to keep the mixture cold. I don't want the butter to melt into the flour, and obviously my hands are warm, so it's better if you use, a fork or a pastry cutter, as they call it. An easier way to do this would be to combine the ingredients in a food processor, because again, it's cold, it's not using your hands, and it's faster and quicker. However, I do prefer to use my hands to do this, but if you have a food processor, you can also do that as well. I added 1 cold egg. So this egg, I did try and keep it in the fridge before I did this, because I don't normally keep my eggs in the fridge, and it is important that you do have a cold egg in this recipe as well. Everything cold. You can see that a dough is pretty much forming already, so you don't need much water for this. So I only put a small splash of water. I'd recommend that you put 1 teaspoon at a time and then gauge how much water you need. I did go in with my hands at this point because I'm only going to mix it briefly. You definitely don't want to overwork this dough, otherwise you'll end up with a very dense and hard pastry. I went ahead with some more water. If you find that you put too much water in your mixture, you can just go ahead and add a little sprinkle of flour and just combine it to make it back into the type of consistency that you want. You basically don't want a wet mixture, but then you don't want your dough to also be too tough or hard either. In this recipe, you definitely need a good 3 teaspoons of water added, and then use your discretion going forward. But you can see what my dough looks like. It's nice and firm, but it is not too hard either. And then if you notice, I literally only needed that for like 10 seconds, if even, just to combine the mixture together. I put it into cling film and put it in the fridge to rest for at least 30 minutes. And here are my apples. I don't know what type of apples these are, to be honest, because I was gifted these apples from somebody's apple tree. But you can use any apples you want. You can use Brambly apples. You can use Granny Smith apples. I don't know any other type of apples, to be honest. So I'm just peeling my apples. I would core my apples if I had a core, but I don't. So I'm just gonna chop the center off basically. You can cut these into any shape you want, really. You can cut them into like cubes or chunks or slices, so it doesn't really matter because I'm stewing these apples anyway. And I decided to have a little taste of it because I didn't really know what the apples would taste like, and they were quite sweet and really nice actually. So I decided they weren't really tart, so I would add some lemon juice to that because I like my apple pie slightly tart, just a little bit. And if you can see, I'm putting my lumps of apple into a bowl filled with water and lemon juice, because I don't want my apples to go all brown. Not that it really matters for this recipe, as you'll see later, the apple does go brown anyway. So I've chopped up all my apples and they're all in my nice bowl filled with water and lemon juice. And did I mention this was about 12 apples? In a pot, I have 3 tablespoons of butter, 4 tablespoons of soft brown sugar, and 3 tablespoons of white sugar. And then I also added 2 teaspoons of vanilla essence. So I'm trying to make just like a caramelly mixture there. I brought this to the boil as caramel does. You need to heat the sugar and butter to make caramel. And then I added about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt just to give it a bit of saltiness. I like that. And then also 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. You have to have cinnamon in apple pie. That's a must. And it's really nice. So there you go. You can see it's bubbling and it looks really nice and caramel like. And then I went ahead and added my sliced apples. The apples do release quite a bit of water, but that's okay. We're just going to boil all that water off. And because I wanted some tartness in my apple pie, I did add 2 teaspoons of lemon juice, but I would recommend that you taste your mixture and decide how tart you want it. And I added another little sprinkle of cinnamon powder as well there because I didn't think it was cinnamony enough. And after that, I covered it and allowed it to boil. So here is my stewed apples. It took, I would say, about 20 to 30 minutes to come to this point, and I did uncover the pot at one point to allow the water to evaporate off. At this point, I did turn on my oven to preheat. I turned it on to about 190 degrees and it preheated for about 10 minutes. I prepared my tin for the pastry. So I just have a normal cake tin there, and then I put it on top of the greaseproof paper just to make sure that it's wide enough to fit into the tin. And then I cut the section off. I folded my greaseproof paper into a triangle. Folded it again just like this. So you want to fold it 3 times over into a nice pointy triangle basically. I don't really want to mess with words to try and explain what I'm doing here, so please just follow what I'm doing. So you want to put the point in the middle point where you think the middle point of the baking pan is, and then you want to just cut off where the crease is, just like I'm doing. What I'm trying to achieve is a nice circle that will fit into the base of the pan. Mine isn't a perfect circle, but that doesn't matter. It's more like a square, but that's okay. If you want to do it more perfectly, obviously you have to cut it more into a curve, but that's just fine for me. And then I'm just oiling the base so that the greaseproof paper will then stick to the base. And there is my tin prepared. You don't have to grease the sides of the tin either. It's perfectly fine like this. It doesn't stick at all. My pastry's been in the fridge for about half an hour now. I took it out and dusted my surface with some flour and then took about 3/4 of my pastry. I cut some off and proceeded to roll that out. So you want to make sure you have a good dusting of flour, otherwise your pastry might just stick everywhere, which is a nuisance. So that's why I'm just dusting it with some more flour, and you want to try and roll it out into as much of a circle as possible. As you can see, mine is looking more square than circle, which was fine, but to make life easier for yourself, do try and make a circle like I'm doing. I'm just rolling out the edges away from a square shape and more into a circle because your tin is circle. Also, I rolled out my pastry fairly thinly. You can make yours a little bit thicker if you prefer, but try not to make it too thick because you don't want a pastry pie and not an apple pie. I find myself too funny, seriously. So anyway, you can see that I continue to roll my pastry to try and get an evenly rolled out pastry. I don't want some parts to be thicker than others because that wouldn't really be good. So when you are happy with that, just use this procedure to lift your pastry off the mat and then onto your baking tin. You want to just unroll it nice and gently and try not to squish your pastry as well. If you can, just carry your rolling pin by the wooden part and not the pastry part. Be gentle with this as well. I was being very gentle not to break my pastry. I gently kind of maneuvered the pastry to sit inside the tin and used my fingers to try and get them into the corners of the tin as well. I don't know if you can see, but I'm being really gentle because this is pastry and you can easily puncture it with your fingers. So light fingers and gentleness is very essential here as well. When I was happy with my pastry, smooth and nicely set into my baking tin, I went ahead and spooned in my filling. So my filling was still very hot when I did this, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to cool this down before you do the step, which is very handy. So the hot filling isn't going to be detrimental to your pie. Once that was done, I set it aside and continued with the top of my pie. So the other quarter, was it a quarter? Yes, it was a quarter of my pastry. I went ahead and rolled that also into a nice circle. Again, make sure you do dust it with some flour to prevent sticking, and also try and roll it out nice and evenly. Again, I lifted my pastry off with my rolling pin and I placed that gently on top of my pie. This method of lifting the pastry with your rolling pin is very handy because if you try to lift this with your hands, it would just be a mess basically. The pastry could break. It's just difficult. So lifting it with the rolling pin is a much easier way of doing this, I've found. As you can see, I'm pressing the pastry down gently onto the apples just to shape my apple pie and to get rid of any dead space. I then went ahead and cut off the excess pastry with a knife. Try not to go too low towards the apples because you don't want, well, I didn't want my apples to be sticking out of my pie. I wanted a nice enclosed pie, but do what you want. I then removed the excess pastry, which I stored in the freezer for a later date when I'll use it again. I used a fork to pinch the sides together or the edges together to basically close off the pie, which worked really great actually. I used the knife to just open up the pie a little bit in the middle to make sure that when the pressure builds, it doesn't like crack my pie open or anything like that, just to allow some steam to come out of it. I decided I actually wanted to decorate my pie a little, so I took a little bit of pastry, rolled that out. I didn't have a pastry cutter. If you do, definitely use that if you have any like nice pretty shapes, but I wanted hearts because I like hearts. So I just cut out heart shapes with a knife and it worked perfectly. So you can be creative with yours if you want. So I have my cute little shapes and I just basically arrange them onto my pie. Nice and easy, just like that. To make my pie nice and brown and glossy when it comes out of the oven, I just brushed the top with a bit of egg. So yes, I messed up my shape a little, but I did manage to fix it. So yeah, you want to brush the top of your pie with some egg before putting it in the oven. If you want, you can just use a bit of butter instead, or you can use a bit of golden syrup with hot water instead if you don't want to waste a whole egg. I didn't waste my egg. I did use my egg for something else, so yeah. Finally, my pie was ready to go in the oven. So it did go in the oven for 45 to 60 minutes at 190 degrees. You'll know your pie is done when it's nice and golden brown on top. Here we are, the pie is ready and it looks amazing. I did leave it to rest for about 15 minutes before I did this. So I just put a cup underneath my ejectable pan and ejected it, if that makes sense. If you don't have a pan like that, you can literally just tip it out gently, and it should be fine. And there, oh, it looks so good. And literally, if you serve this to someone and tell them that you made this yourself, they would be so impressed with you. My husband was really impressed. Like, he thought this was amazing, and so did I. It was really yummy, and the pastry is literally perfection. I'm telling you, it's really nice, and I really hope you try this. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye.